We're getting a bit of work done on the 40 series LandCruiser on this episode, and if you don't know what's going on, head on back and watch some of the previous episodes of Full Ball where I essentially pull this old LandCruiser out of a barn, strip it down and start rebuilding it from the ground up. With this motor, however, I've just done a light rebuild, just given it a quick hone, a new set of rings, and gone through it to make sure it's going to be reliable. So when I go four-wheel driving, I won't get stuck in the bush. So plans are, we're going to try and get this motor running. Now, this thing's going to have to go into stasis for a little bit whilst I get the bodywork done, so we'll get cracking on that, eh? So we're back at it again with the 40 series LandCruiser. I haven't really been able to work on it as much as I would have hoped. I would have liked to have been a fair bit further along, but hey, that's life, and things get in the road, and you get new jobs and all that sort of stuff, and then you just run out of time. Anyway, we're looking at the B series engine today. Of course, it's starting to look a whole lot more like an engine. All the injector lines, injector pump, all the ancillaries are back on it. I am missing a few bits, such as this thermostat housing, which is really rotted out, which is a bit of a shame. I can buy these new from Toyota, however they're like a couple of $100. So, what we're doing right now is this motor is pretty darn close to being able to start. However, I don't have the Welsh plug in the cam tunnel at the back, which is probably a necessary item for keeping all your oil inside of your engine. So that's why I've got it up on the engine stand, lifted up in the engine lift, because it's pretty difficult to get at the rear of the cam tunnel whilst it's on the engine stand. So this here is one of the final pieces of the puzzle for the mighty B series engine. It is a 56mm Welsh plug, or core plug, or freeze plug, whatever you want to call it. And its predominant reason of being is to cap off the oil in the back of the cam tunnel. Now, I had to remove the old one even though it was in good nick, purely because you have to remove it to get the cam bearing tool in there to punch in your new cam bearings. So I've got some Toyota Seal Packing Black. Now this is like your general black RTV or Permatex or whatever you want to call it. However, this is the Toyota brand stuff, and it is the duck's guts. It will set you back like 50 buckaroonies, but if you are looking for the duck's guts sealant, this Toyota Black is the stuff. Anyway, so now that we've got the Welsh plug in the back of the motor, I can start putting the flywheel and everything back together on it. Now I'm just going to dummy it up. I've got sort of like a cover plate that should go before the bell housing. However, all I really need to do is put the flywheel on it and the bell housing on it, so I can mount up the starter motor, get it cranking, and I can go from there. Because what I want to do is get this motor running, and the reason being is that it's probably going to be in stasis, and I just want to get all the injector pump and all the injectors wet with diesel and make sure that it actually goes before I store it for a little bit. And when I mean store it, it's probably only going to be stored for like, I don't know, 5 months or so. There we have it, boys and girls, the mighty B series engine pretty well ready to start. Now, this hasn't been the most professional rebuild. I didn't skim the head, nor did I bore it or put new sleeves or anything in it. And some of you may be wondering, why is that the case? Well, one, because of money, and two, because it really wasn't that bad when I pulled it apart. And It didn't really need it, however it was a good thing that I went and done it because of those cam bearings, of course. And I reckon it's just a magnificent piece of Japanese engineering that we have resurrected, and hopefully we'll get a few 100,000 Ks out of it. But that said, it might not last in this particular vehicle, because down the track I might decide to put like a 13BT or a 14BT or something cool in it. So that sort of explains why I didn't really go the full hog with this motor. So we've got the bell housing on it. It's got the flywheel on it, which has been previously machined, so it's in fairly good nick. I didn't have to send it out and get it machined. It did have a bit of surface rust on it, but that'll disappear after a few clutch dumps out in the bush. Also got this gigantuan starter motor in it, which is just massive. That's probably got more horsepower than your MX-5, that thing, or at least more torque. It doesn't have a clutch in it because I will be pulling that bell housing and starter motor off of it. I'll probably rebuild the starter motor, or at least pull it apart and check out the brushes and give it a bit of a clean up and what have you. And of course the bell housing needs a clean up. The main prerogative, of course, was just to get the starter motor bolted up to it so I could spin it over, get some oil pressure, and maybe get it started. Well fellas, this is a pretty pivotal moment in the engine rebuild, because I'm getting pretty darn close to starting it for the first time. Like, it's pretty well all together, bar the thermostat housing and a few other bits and bobs which aren't really necessary for it to run. But because it is sort of like a freshish motor, I want to make sure I definitely have oil pressure before I go and like fire it over. So bell housing's on it, flywheel's on it, starter motor's hooked up, blocks earthed out to that battery, and I've got power to the starter motor, so all I have to do is just jerry rig it to engage a solenoid and get it to crank over. Now, it doesn't have an oil filter on it, so what I want to do is make sure that oil is coming out of the oil filter housing before I screw an oil filter on it. And I'll also run a test light on the oil pressure switch, and that way when it gets oil pressure I will know. So there we go, we've got a bit of oil coming out of the oil filter housing. So Davo, the mechanical wizard, has used his spidey senses to detect that something mechanical is going on. So he has come from his wizard's lair to give me a hand getting this thing started for the first time after the rebuild.
It might be just that it's not quick enough to
set the switch off.
Yep.
There we go. So what we're doing here might look a little bit weird. We're cranking it over with the glow plugs out, of course, so it doesn't have compression, and also so we can make sure that all of the injectors are firing properly.
They seem to be spraying.
I love big carcinogenic mists. We've probably got the perfect ratio going on in the shed here for a flash explosion.
So what you should do is just be close. If the thing goes crazy, put your hand over the intake.
Oh yeah, nah, should be right.
So you're going to film the
initial startup.
So what happens if it takes off on me?
I'll put my hand on it.
You might drop the camera.
Well, I've got two hands, don't I?
Oh yeah.
So you're just buzzing it. Exciting times, Davo. See if my rubbish rebuild is any good. Not buzzed enough. From memory, it took quite a while to glow.
there a plug in the sump for that? Gee, she sounds good.
She sounds like a beauty.
Yeah, that. Isn't there somewhere in the sump that goes to?
Potentially so. She sounds pretty sweet, doesn't it?
That sounds real sweet.
I haven't done the tappets up or nothing either. You know what I mean? Like,
I'm dying.
carbon monoxide poisoning.
I gotta get out of here.
I bet the neighbours love us.
Oh, wasn't that loud?
I'm happy.
Oh yeah. I'm happy to see the fresh diesel get through those injectors and stuff. Save them. Sort of missed a bit here and there, but I think it'll be fine.
That's probably, you see all the bubbles going into it? Into the...
Oh yeah, there's a bit of that too. But...
Well, that pretty well concludes this episode of Full Bore, and I'm pretty darn happy with the conclusion of this Dingle Ball engine rebuild. Essentially what it is was just a cheap, easy engine rebuild in the back shed, just something to do after work, and I'm mighty happy with how the compression sounds in this motor and how it runs. It sounds like an absolute peach. And the thing is, I've done all this work and it's probably going to be the slowest moving object on the face of the planet. But that doesn't mind me. If you've bought a 40 series and expect it to be fast, you've bought the wrong car. Anyway, we'll catch you on a future episode of this channel, which is of course Full Bore.